I hope everyone enjoyed the first session, and I am delighted to reintroduce Stephen back to the stage from Neste, who are the session sponsors for this session. So welcome, Stephen.
So I'm not going to, as a session sponsor, talk too much about Neste in this session, because I really want to get to the topic at hand, which is why Australia, the significant role Australia can play in the global fuels transition. And to set the scene for the great panel and the great speakers that I have, I just wanted to give you some data on the number of vehicles that are registered in Australia. So this is numbers from 2022, 20.7 million registered motor vehicles as at 31st January 2022, a 2% increase from 2021. 70.1% of these vehicles were petrol-powered, down from 71.3% in 2021, perhaps explained by the rise in EVs. 27.2% were diesel-powered, so up from 26.4% in 2021. And Australia consumed about 40,905,000 million metric tons of fossil fuel in 2022. So what you can see from this is, despite the number of electric vehicles, so there was a 100% increase in light electric vehicles coming on the roads here in Australia, fossil fuel still tends to be largely in use currently. And I think as we transition as well, fossil fuel will continue to be a big part of the energy mix here in Australia as it is globally. So if we have electrification, why do we need renewable fuels? Well, if you look at the white box, what that shows is the global oil consumption in 2040. This is data from the World Energy Outlook, as well as the World Economic Forum's Clean Skies for Tomorrow. So about 4.8 billion tons of oil equivalent will be used by 2040. Out of this number, about 2.85 billion tons of oil equivalent will be used in the transportation sector, and that is marine, aviation, and road transport. If we continue the trajectory on electric vehicles, there would be roughly about 600 million electric passenger cars by 2040. And these 600 million electric cars would displace about 360 million tons of oil equivalent. So still a large amount of fossil fuel in use in the transport sector. Now, biofuels have the opportunity to displace more than 1 billion tons of fossil fuels in the transport sector. And this is all technologies, not just, so it's biodiesel, it's alcohol to jet, bioethanol, as well as all types of biofuels. Still a large amount of oil used in the transportation sector. And of course, we need future technologies. So hydrogen, power to liquids, and other technologies could help displace transport fossil fuels in the long term. But what we need here, if we want to decarbonize transport, is we need to look at all solutions. And I think that's the purpose of this slide. Focusing specifically on Australia then, we've done some numbers here at Neste. And Australia's current greenhouse gas emission reduction measures are not enough to reach your 2030 target on time. This is based on sort of the current trajectory. Of course, that we could see a speed up of hydrogen, we could see a speed up of electric vehicles, and that could change. But with the overall emission reduction target of 43% by 2030, compared to 2005, you need to reduce about 354 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. And what we see here is that you will fall short by about 14% if you continue on the current trajectory. Biofuels or a carbon reduction program could provide a way of reducing the gap of 14%. And one option is, for example, an 18% biofuel blend by 2030. Of course, this would change depending on other technologies that would come on stream in that sort of 7-year period. But if you were to look purely at biofuels across the transportation sector, an 18% blend would help Australia reach its greenhouse gas emissions reduction target. A 13% blend will not work, neither will a 7% blend. So there is a tremendous opportunity here in Australia for biofuels. So with that, we've got a great bunch of speakers here. I'm not going to read all their CVs and bios, but we've got Max Temminghoff from CSIRO, Graeme Potger from Qantas, Matt Doyle from Wagner Corporation, Michael Hart from Ampol, and we also have Ignacio Hernandez from HIF Global. And we'll have them come up in that order. So with that, Max, may I ask you to come up and give your presentation?
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Shahana, for inviting me to speak today. Hi, everyone. My name is Max Temminghoff. I work for the CSIRO Futures Group. We are the external-facing strategic advisory arm of the organisation. We work between our 5,000 scientists and a range of government and private customers looking to develop strategies to encourage the uptake of emerging technologies. As the opening presenter today, I would like to provide some scene setting for our SAF speakers and take you through some of CSIRO's current work. The aviation industry is projected to increase its CO2 emissions through growth in passenger demand, posing major challenges for net zero targets. The aviation sector generates approximately 2.5% of the world's carbon emissions, which will grow as other sectors continue to decarbonise with mature technologies. Domestic aviation emissions in Australia have more than tripled between 1990 and 2019. And this is coupled with projections for Australian jet fuel demand to increase by 75% from 2023 to 2050. Global airlines recognise this trend, and the International Air Transport Association, which represents 300 airlines and 83% of air traffic, including Qantas and Virgin, are aiming to achieve net zero by 2050. But aviation is a hard-to-abate sector, with limited technological solutions available to lower emissions effectively. There are 5 main strategies that can aid in emissions reductions. Improving fuel efficiency by adopting new fleets with advanced materials and implementing more efficient aircraft movements. Exploring new low-emission propulsion technologies such as battery and fuel cell electric planes and hydrogen combustion. Utilising carbon offsets. Using flight alternatives like high-speed rail and video conferencing to reduce demand. And sustainable aviation fuel. Although all need to be pursued, considering the limitations of operational efficiency gains, the early stage of alternative propulsion technologies, the growing competition for offsets, and the limited use cases for alternative technologies, SAF emerges as a critical tool for decarbonisation. Australia has a significant opportunity to develop a diversified portfolio of feedstocks for a domestic SAF industry. Broad latitude and longitude, temperate climates, advanced farming practices, and established supply chains are all assets to develop a range of biogenic feedstocks. As well as the potential for biogenic feedstocks, Australia is set to capitalise on its renewable energy potential and become a significant renewable energy and green hydrogen producer. Green hydrogen will be a crucial commodity in both the refining of biofuels and, once scaled to significant production quantities, also as a feedstock for the power-to-liquid process. Each state and territory has its own advantages. These areas strongly correlate with arable land and hydrogen production strategies, with the east and southwest coast more likely to look to biogenic feedstocks in the immediate term, and PTL being largely universal with large renewable energy potential nationwide. Capital cities also provide an opportunity for the use of municipal solid waste. Becoming a SAF producer will present a range of opportunities for Australia. First of all, producing fuels from Australian feedstocks could provide a complete sovereign solution to mitigate the risk of supply interruptions, shortages, and depleted storage. Australia imports 90% of its liquid fuels, including jet fuel, through long supply chains that are exposed to geopolitical and climate change risks and delays associated with contaminated batches. Additionally, by securing domestic production of SAF and other fuels, Australia can buffer itself from international fossil fuel and oil price fluctuations. The need for alternative backup fuel supply has also been identified in the federal government's Defence Strategic Review. A local supply of SAF would also allow domestic airlines to access low emissions fuel and contribute to decarbonising Australia and achieving national net zero by 2050. Without domestic production, SAF is currently limited to aircraft that travel to international airports where SAF is currently available. Furthermore, SAF production can be complemented by other low carbon products, including renewable diesel and lighter hydrocarbons, offering decarbonisation options for road transport, mining, remote power generation and heating. Feedstock production and collection depend heavily on regional areas and to construct and manage both supporting infrastructure and supply chains. And opportunities will be missed if feedstock was simply exported without domestic value added through local refining. Some production pathways can effectively utilise waste streams that are currently challenging to manage, including urban waste and emissions from hard-to-abate industries. By repurposing these waste streams for feedstocks for SAF, significant benefits are realised by both SAF producers and waste producers. And finally, Australia can become a leader in the production and upgrading of sustainable feedstocks for export to neighbouring countries looking to decarbonise their economies. Some of Australia's neighbouring countries face landmass limitations and cannot produce surplus renewable electricity or feedstocks to produce biofuels. As a result, Australia can play a key role in supplying these countries with renewable fuels. To inform the development of the SAF industry, Australia has partnered with Boeing to analyse the availability of sustainable feedstocks for producing SAF in the APAC region, with a focus on Australia and New Zealand. The analysis covers various feedstocks, including oilseeds, carbohydrates, waste products, agricultural and sawmill residues, and hydrogen. For each feedstock, the analysis estimates the current and future availability and potential fuel output up to 2050. The analysis also considers the challenges of reallocating these feedstocks for SAF production, including the commercial, sustainability, policy and social impact considerations. To understand the position of Australia and New Zealand in the APAC region, the report also analyses the likely role of other APAC countries in the region. Finally, a roadmap is presented that outlines the key messages and recommendations to scale a SAF industry in Australia in a coordinated manner, considering the evolving technology and feedstock risks. The report is informed by consultations with over 40 local and international organisations from business, government, research organisations, and an advisory group was convened to discuss the findings. To understand how much SAF feedstock Australia currently produces and what that means in terms of potential sovereign production, key feedstocks were analysed and their projected growth modelled through to 2050. Two scenarios were produced, each taking into consideration differing feedstock production rates, biorefinery yields, and how much feedstock would be allocated to SAF production. Two feedstock growths were chosen and applied through to 2050 across all feedstocks except hydrogen, where an exponential growth curve was used. Two jet fuel yield scenarios were explored through low and high percentages of jet fuel yield to reflect differences in refinery priorities. And two feedstock allocation hypotheticals were explored through a low and high percentage of feedstock allocated to jet fuel production. These parameters and assumptions were based on literature review and consultations with our stakeholders. Through a combination of feedstocks and technologies, local feedstocks can meet a large and growing portion of Australia's jet fuel demand. However, domestic refining capacity is lagging, and failure to capitalise will lead to lost opportunities. Our analysis projects that in 2025, Australia will have enough feedstock to produce 60% of local jet fuel demand using biogenic feedstocks, growing to 90% by 2050 as biogenic feedstocks continue to grow and hydrogen production scales. But this opportunity may be fleeting. Countries around the world are investing to build their SAF production capability and are purchasing available feedstocks. Tallow is being exported to Singapore and the US. Canola has historically gone to the EU to produce biodiesel, and wood pellets are being exported to Japan. In a scenario where Australia becomes only a feedstock provider rather than an integrated local processor and SAF producer, it risks missing out on several benefits of a regional bioeconomy. This includes liquid fuel security for commercial and military aviation, local job creation for the upgrading and processing of feedstocks, renewable byproducts such as other biofuels and bioplastics, and broader sustainability benefits of managing a complete value chain of a bioeconomy. I'd like to finish on highlighting some of the work that CSIRO is doing to support a SAF industry. Driven by market demands, CSIRO is building on existing efforts to actively contribute to solving research and technology challenges within a local SAF industry. In Power to Liquid, we are supporting the development of a hydrogen industry through R&D and collaborations, as well as developing several direct air capture technologies. In feedstock production and processing, our agriculture and energy groups are working to increase crop and oil yields and improve feedstock processing technologies such as gasification out at our Pullen Vale site. Our Towards Net Zero mission is focusing on collaboration between industry and research to achieve net zero in hard-to-abate sectors with a focus on aviation. And in strategic advisory, our group is working with the Royal Australian Air Force to explore SAF opportunities and with industry for the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Roadmap, which is due for release in the third quarter of this year. So please seek me out today to discuss any of the aforementioned technologies and research areas, or Heidi Hoff, our partner at Boeing, who's also been working on our Sustainable Aviation Fuel Roadmap. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Graeme Potger, and I'm head of SAF at the Qantas Group. So my day job is largely to set the group's SAF strategy and try and work out what a SAF supply chain looks like in order to meet our 2030 goals and beyond. So in the 10 minutes I've got with you this morning, I'm going to very much give you a 35,000-foot view of Qantas's plans with respect to SAF and how we look forward to our strategy. So the starting point is really this graph, and a lot of airlines, we call it the wedge diagram, and really it's how we're going to get to 2050 and meet our net zero commitments. Two key bits to jump out of this graph. If you look at the top line, that essentially is our emissions profile if we keep the fleet frozen and you bake in normal industry growth levels. The key bit for this forum, and particularly around SAF, is that red line, and also the bit on the grey line, which comes from our fleet renewal, so increasing efficiency through getting new planes. For an end-of-line long-haul carrier like Qantas, about a third of the decarbonisation that we're expecting to 2050 is going to come from SAF. And it just reinforces and underscores the primacy of SAF for a long-haul carrier like us. So 70% of our emissions profile comes from our international network, which really reinforces SAF for us. This is another graph that I like to show, just to illustrate why SAF is so critical. So the red line basically reflects our operations as they currently stand by fleet type. And what jumps out of this page is that if you have a sober look at the current state of art around electric-powered aircraft and hydrogen-powered aircraft, I think the best view at the moment is that they're likely to penetrate by 2030 into our regional size aircraft. So if you've ever jumped onto one of our Q400s, our turboprops on our regional flights, we're talking about that size of plane. Even then, those technologies, because of sort of density limits, requires us to pull out several rows of seats, which is not great for the operating economics of a regional aircraft. On the bottom axis, and you'll remember this is where a lot of our emissions come from, we believe at the moment that SAF is the only answer for our long-haul aircraft. So that is why it's been amazing to watch, and I've been at Qantas for sort of 20 plus years now, but it's been amazing to watch a topic move from the periphery of the airline right into our strategic planning. And that's evidenced by the fact that we've appointed in the last couple of years a CSO, and we've also set up an internal SAF governance board to help us with the decisions that we're going to have to make in the next coming years. I wanted to just dwell on this particular aspect of the SAF story because I do think it's pretty critical. So the reality is we pick up 70% of our fuel domestically, and so from a blank sheet of paper, we understand that there are enormous challenges for setting up a SAF sector in Australia. When we talk to various project proponents, what is a common challenge or hurdle that's raised with us is early stage development capital and that early stage risk funding. That's probably the key challenge that we've heard when we've contacted the market. So recognising that, we partnered with Airbus to develop a partnership where we both chipped in US $200 million in early stage funding, and we have spent the better part of sort of 12 to 18 months now assessing all of the projects around the country. And to touch on Mac's point, there's a real regional view around what works best depending on which region you're going around. And so we're now in the process of working out how to deploy that funding in a way that's beneficial to the whole sector. And one of the key points I wanted to illustrate here is that we're investing not strictly just for financial returns. So we are also investing for ESG and sustainability outcomes. And by that, I mean, we're very keen on understanding the story around SAF. The reality is for us, we are not the end of the supply chain or the value chain here. While we may combust the fuel in our flights, with our customers and our corporate customers are going to be very interested in this SAF story. And the reality of the economics and the SAF premium is that we're going to need those guys to help us pay for the bills. So we're very keen on issues such as feedstock traceability, and we're also keen on accelerating technology diversity. So we understand, depending on your starting point, that certain proponents are going to gravitate to certain technology pathways. Our in-house view is that all pathways are going to have to be leveraged, and so we're very keen on promoting all of the various ways of making SAF. The other bit that we're very keen to do as well is to attract other capital. So at the moment, we understand that there is, green capital out there. They like to only invest in de-risked projects, and so with Qantas being a major potential off-taker to any given project, we believe on the projects that we jump in on, we can de-risk some of that other capital come in and hopefully crowd in some more capital. So how have we gone in the last 12 months? So this is a bit of a report card, and I just wanted to touch on a few aspects of it. So I mentioned the $200 million partnership we've done with Airbus. I'm happy to say we've deployed the first amounts out of that to a Jet Zero project, and I can see Ed there, and I won't steal his thunder because I know he's on later today. But that's a great project and indicative of the style of projects that we want to get involved in. The other key bit structurally for the market that I wanted to highlight is that we have set up this SAF coalition. So we have brought together some forward-leaning progressive corporates around Australia, and what we've endeavoured to do is to decouple the environmental attributes of the SAF, which is essentially the emission reduction, away from the physical fuel, and endeavoured to transfer those to our coalition members. And it's a key part of what we believe the ecosystem is going to be, and a key lever in how we're going to address the green premium. Another really promising bit that's come out a bit and sort of illustrative of this ecosystem approach, under our Qantas loyalty program, we have set up a sub-program called the Green Tier, and essentially what we're trying to do there is get individual loyalty members to start making sustainably minded decisions. And we've linked that now to our coalition, and so our coalition members, their employees, we facilitate them joining the Green Tier and at an individual level, we're trying to promote more and more sustainable choices. As other speakers have said during the course of today, we are seeing some early green shoots in terms of policy development. We're doing what we can to try and instill a sense of urgency around that. We do see a lot of regional movements in this space, and like other speakers have said, the opportunity is there for Australia to take it. I just quickly wanted to draw or raise one aspect about the Jet Zero project, because I do think it's indicative of how we're going to have to approach this, and that is the consortium approach. So what we have discovered are and people in the crowd will know this better than I, but these projects are very difficult to try and stand up. There are lots of moving parts. There is a long, complex value chain, and our view is that we can only really tackle that at pace and at scale through collective action. So I just wanted to call out that in that particular project, which we've supported, it's the combined efforts of the Queensland government, Qantas and Airbus, a good tech provider in LanzaJet, and the project development skills of Ed and his team at Jet Zero. But that is going to be a prototype of the kind of projects we're going to support going forward. So I think that's my time up. So thanks very much.
Hello everybody, my name's Adriana Downie. I'm here representing Licella today, and was wanting to give you an update on where Licella is at in progressing in commercialising our hydrothermal liquefaction technology, as well as some of the high points of some recent work we've been doing looking at project delivery and development in northern Queensland, looking at applying our technology to sugarcane residues. I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. There it is. So when we look at putting projects together where we can implement our technology, Licella very much is driven to be able to license out our technology IP that we've developed over the last 15 years in looking at highly efficiently converting the carbon molecules that we have in lignocellulosic feedstocks into finished fuels. Because as we know as an industry, to get the volumes that we need to deliver the type of market opportunity that Max and Stephen have presented earlier today, we know that we have to branch into this broader scale of technology. So Licella is very much about delivering the conversion technology piece into this industry. But for us to do that, we need to build projects around that and build a project team and a delivery industry in which we can implement our technology. So we know we need to look at resources. We have the conversion technology piece, and we've heard from others on the panel today about the product market pool that's being developed for SAF, renewable diesel, but also we see the broader industry that Neste also identified in their presentation of renewable chemicals, naphtha, being able to really decarbonise across a lot of materials from the industry. So as part of the work that we've been doing with the support of the Queensland Government Biofutures program, we've been doing some feasibility work in North Queensland to really look at being able to take the lignocellulosic portion, the residues from sugarcane industry, and convert them into higher value products. And so we need to, what we found in the work that we've done, and what a lot of us in this room know today, that there is a huge opportunity in northern Queensland. There's huge amounts of residues. Sugarcane is our second largest agricultural crop, following wheat. There's millions of tonnes of feedstock that is either being burnt and combusted in the field or is being inefficiently combusted through cogen facilities to essentially have a waste management solution for that material. If we are to take the whole of cane resource, use it for food production, use it for value-added process, but use the whole cane material for liquid fuels and carbon preservation, we're able to create a new industry for Queensland that if we look at the sugar industry, 40,000 jobs, $2 billion of revenue, when we look at the revenue models of introducing this type of model and rolling it out through the industry, we really can create jobs of the scale of the sugar milling industry and even take over that, so that we would form a shadow of the sugar milling industry as it is. When we're looking at these agricultural industries, it's also about regional development for diversification for farmers. So we're not looking at just, there's opportunities certainly to coexist on brownfield sites with sugar mills and leverage the existing infrastructure that is already there, and that is definitely an early advantage to move into this industry. But we're seeing lots of opportunities for a whole new bioeconomy, biorefinery industry to be based around our agricultural industries. And so part of the feasibility work was to demonstrate that we can prove this pathway of being able to take not just the sugars or fats and greases, but to take lignocellulosic feedstocks through to a SAF product from Queensland produced agricultural residues. And so we took tops and trash material from sugarcane farmers who are represented here today, some of our partners in the Burdekin. We upgraded that material in our demonstration facility at Summersby into a bio-crude product, which then upgraded through hydrotreating into kerosene fractions, and the fractions of fuels and products that we commonly know and trust from the fossil industry. So being able to actually have direct replacements for those fossil industry products. With the scale of just the residues alone, and obviously not utilising all of the residues, we were able to model that within 2020, between now and 2035, we could deliver 15% of Australians' aviation fuel demand via this pathway. Doing demonstration work on this, we didn't just demonstrate the proof of the pathway, but we were able to collect the process data, conversion efficiencies, and really demonstrate that by doing HTL application, being able to take those lignocellulosics, the conversion efficiency from molecules in the biomass crop into the finished fuels is really unrivaled by any other pathway. And our ability to deliver high yields of SAF product at prices which are affordable, arguably, to the aviation industry, so that we are able to provide more value on the economic scenario to farmers, but also competitive prices to an aviation industry that is now subject to inflated SAF prices. So the demonstration work that we were able to do really allowed Licella to be able to put some more focus onto agricultural residues. The photo here is of our demonstration facility at Summersby. The smaller photo is of our plant in Prince George that's currently under construction. And so a lot of the development work that we've been doing has been focused in that forestry and wood sector, looking at forestry residues. And so the work that we were able to do for the Queensland government helped us to transition and put some more resources into looking at agricultural residues. And it also, this project that we did in Queensland has been benefiting from the flow of information that's coming from our first commercial plant that's being built currently in Wilton in the UK. This project uses the same core technology, our CAT HTR refining. This project is being applied to end-of-life plastics for recycling end-of-life plastics into a circular economy for the plastics industry and chemical recycling. But a lot of the lessons learned and the commercialisation story that we've gained from our plastics applications of our technology, we're able now to draw that project delivery and business development experience into the projects that we're developing here in Queensland. One of the clear advantages that Licella has that we're finding is we're able to produce volumes of biocrude that are enabling us to do enough hydrotreating to make volumes to go through certification and verification processes. So one of the barriers to entry is certifications for SAF through ASTM. We have some support from the federal government here to help us fund and navigate the arduous process of going through ASTM certification. But our pilot facilities in Summersby have been busily producing instead of just the volumes in litres to volumes in barrels of material that can be then shipped, that is currently, unfortunately, being shipped overseas for international entities to do upgrading and certification and market development work from. So the feasibility work that we have now and moving forward, we have that asset now that we're really utilising to be able to make market impacts. And we know that the market is huge. And so from Licella's point of view, we look at how do we roll out now the technology to supply this exploding demand that we're seeing for not only SAF, but for green naphtha, renewable chemicals. And the model for us to do that is when scale is obviously key, is what's driving the market. Our first projects are going to be expensive and make expensive SAF. As we roll out, as we've seen with all industries, we can model those costs coming down as we demonstrate and de-risk the industry. So although there is huge gains, economic development, regional development, contributions to GDP by delivering a whole industry, we need to first deliver the first spokes of this industry. And so that's what our focus is to get the first projects up. All the components are here. When we look at Queensland, we see that all the components are here. But now it's about seizing that opportunity to deliver these projects. And this is how, as an industry, we need to work together to actually get from where we are to where we're going. There's a lot of interest in this project. We've hosted tours to the region to show interested stakeholders, and we need now to move that to actually delivering the project. As our next steps to do that, we've got an MOU in place with working with growers to look at the opportunity and make sure they're engaged in and coming along as part of important stakeholders. We're also looking at developing a project with partners Helmont Energy and Far Northern Milling at the Mossman Mill, and so that's moving forward. That's our focus, to deliver these first projects for the region. That's me. I've put some conclusions in here for the slide deck, but that's all. Great, thank you very much, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. Matt Doyle from Wagner Corporation. I'm going to take a little bit of a different view. We're coming to you from an asset owner of an airport and business park, so we've got a big sustainability drive there, and I'll just take you through that first, and we kind of get towards SAF towards the end. So Wagner Corporation are a infrastructure and asset owner. We own the Wellcamp Airport, the Wellcamp Business Park surrounding that airport, and we've got a wharf down in Pinkenba and a bunch of other residential and commercial assets. We've got a history in trying to be sustainable through all our businesses. So what you see here is a product that we've started developing about 15 years ago called Earth-Friendly Concrete. We looked at the problem and said there's 1 tonne of CO2 per tonne of Portland cement. So we developed a binder that negates Portland cement in concrete. So that is now in place mostly in countries that value CO2, so not so much in Australia, but more in UK and US. And the image you see on the right there is a world record pour that happened in London probably about 4 weeks ago. We also have another business locally here that's just taking off called Pyrocal, where we take residues from agriculture, but also municipal solid waste, construction demolition waste, biosolids out of sewage treatment plants, and turn that into a more valuable product of biochar and thermal energy. So the image down the bottom there is for the Logan Water Alliance, where we've partnered with Downer to take biosolids off that sewage treatment plant, saving 10 trucks a day going out of there and converting that into to more valuable products. Introducing the Wellcamp Precinct. So the image in the middle there is the Wellcamp Airport, Wellcamp Business Park. There's about 6,000 acres there, so just to give you an idea of scale, the runway is about 3 kilometres long. We've got Bonza now flying in and out of there, international flights from Cathay Pacific, Qantas, and then we've got the Qantas training facility there as well. We've got a bunch of commercial tenants, including composite fibre technology tenants, heavy industry, and the RSPCA, who have a pet shelter but also a pet hotel, so you can put your dog in the shelter and take off on a plane. New facilities that are coming in the near term, we've got Pacific National. You see the blue line on the left side of that image is the new siding for Pacific National when Inland Rail comes through Toowoomba. We've also trying to implement the Wellcamp Entertainment Precinct, which is racing, sports fields, entertainment venues. So hopefully that'll be up and running by the Olympics. And then importantly on the bottom right there is Boeing's first facility outside of North America for manufacturing of the MQ-28 Ghostbat. So that's a real, I suppose, coming together of minds on how to do things outside of North America, but also on sustainability. And been working heavily with their team to really push the boundaries on that project. It's going to be a 6-star Green Star development, zero carbon during construction, but also embodied materials in the development, and then 6-star neighbours during operation. So Heidi's holding me to account on that one. So I'll just take you through a short video on the precinct. We're really trying to create a campus on site, so it's not just Boeing. There's support facilities around that. There's education, R&D, but also amenities, so you can come to work, feel happy at work, drop your kids off at the creche, go to the on-site doctor and things like that. So I'll just play a short video and then talk about SAF. That'll be fantastic to see that platform flying on SAF pretty soon, hopefully. So pulling out a bit from Wellcamp as a corporate, we're really looking to take our business to carbon zero or climate positive. There's a bunch of reduction measures we're putting in place, but the two key measures around energy, so reducing our energy through renewable energy and a large-scale solar and battery, and sustainable aviation fuel. As an airport, that's one of our biggest CO2 emissions. We are very fortunate around the business park. We have about 1,700 hectares of farmland, so we're converting that into a regenerative grazing project to develop our own credits. So fully defensible, and over time that will give us a bank of credits. So as the airport expands, we can stay on the positive side. So we're really pushing hard to have that done by the end of 24. Really, it's given us a good focus now on SAF and what we need to do to advance the industry. So we're really trying to get involved and work out how we can assist, how we can play a part. We've done a lot of work in studying the different feedstocks, which the speakers before me have really gone through. So I won't spend too much time, but there's a range of feedstocks that are coming into play. The first generation feedstocks that are prevalent now, second generation coming through with sugarcane. Around where we are, there's a lot of sorghum, so there's a lot of potential to put a plant at Wellcamp. And then municipal solid waste through the main capital cities, limited, we're only 26 million people. And then of course the power to liquids, but we're still sort of 10 to 20 years away. As everyone in this room knows, there's been a lot of effort into SAF over the past 15 years, so really great to see the continued effort, and we're just about at that, as Terry said, we're at the doorstep and really able to push across. It's a fantastic report being talked about by Deloitte later on the efforts the efforts that government can take to push that forward, so looking forward to that. Really, where are we at now? So by 24, we're at 9.4 billion litres of Jet A1, going up to 14 billion by 2050. So there's a real fantastic opportunity for us to introduce SAF into that market. There's an enormous economic opportunity, 2.8 billion by 2030, 7.6 by 2050, and of course jobs off the back of that. So we're doing what we can to implement that. From a Wagner perspective, we're really working hard with industry to push that across the line. So looking forward to the discussion as we go forward. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm here to talk about the future of renewables at Ampol's Lytton Refinery. But before I do, I'd like to cover a little bit about Ampol's history, which is relevant to the role I see us playing today and into the future. There we go. From the history vaults. Ampol is proudly Australian, dating back over 100 years. William Walkley, who founded the company, aimed to take on the established international oil companies that dominated the domestic industry in Australia at the time. And following the merger with Caltex Oil Australia back in 1995, the combined entity became the market leader in Australia and would remain so to this day. The Lytton Refinery, which is not far from here, was built in 1965 by Australia and became the first refinery in Australia built by an Australian company using Australian capital. We're now one of only two remaining oil refineries in Australia, and Lytton continues to support Australia's energy security today and into the future. Ampol's scale, market-leading infrastructure, customer relationships and supply chain expertise means we have an important role to play in the energy transition. Last year, Ampol acquired New Zealand company Z Energy, making Ampol the leading trans-Tasman energy supplier. And as a transport energy company, our future is about providing whatever energy our customers need, wherever they need it. The ability to repurpose our market-leading infrastructure for multiple energy uses in the future will support the most efficient pathway for our customers' decarbonisation needs. We're focused on developing and enabling low-carbon solutions to help our customers reduce their emissions through electrification of mobility and the development of renewable fuels. It's a nice picture of Lytton Refinery there. Earlier this year, we were really pleased to announce the feasibility study together with ENEOS, into an advanced biofuels plant at Lytton Refinery, producing up to 500 million litres per annum of renewable diesel and SAF. We're also really pleased to announce an MOU between Ampol, ENEOS and the Queensland Government to identify areas where the Queensland Government support this project and build a bioenergy industry here in Queensland. The feasibility study is focused on determining the right technology, capacity and feedstocks to fully leverage the refinery's advantages. And we're focusing our study around feedstocks from animal, agricultural and other wastes prevalent in the Queensland market. Aside from providing low carbon sustainable fuels to customers, the facility would also provide additional benefits such as energy security, local jobs and supporting the local agricultural and manufacturing industries. We're well into the study now and we're aiming to recommend progressing to the next phase by the end of this year. So we know Lytton Refinery is a highly advantaged location for advanced biofuels manufacturing. So just calling out some of the unique advantages that Lytton has. In particular, it's obviously an existing refinery with capability, industrial zoning. You can see there's spare land up there, so we will be able to build the plant there. We have excess hydrogen production, and of course we have all the logistics infrastructure that comes with a refinery. Secondly, it's close to customer demand, so we have a pipeline to the airport and close to the Queensland mining demand centre as well. And of course, we're also close to a range of different feedstocks. So a bit about our partner ENEOS. We were really excited to partner with ENEOS. For those of you who are less familiar with ENEOS, they are the largest oil company in Japan. They have around 50% of the market share in Japan and nearly 2 million barrels a day of refining capacity. So just as a comparison, the Lytton Refinery is around 110,000 barrels a day and ENEOS has nearly 2 million barrels a day. So, you know, they're significant. ENEOS is actively pursuing international renewables projects. So in Australia, they're progressing hydrogen, solar and biofuels project. And in particular, I'll just call out their Edenvale solar project near Chinchilla, which is about to commence generation. So ENEOS brings their refining technology, their scale and their presence in the Japanese aviation market. And we believe there's a unique opportunity for the two companies to work together to access shipping synergies between Australia and Japan and also to provide the additional scale needed to help the overall project economics. So what's going to make this project successful? I think we've heard today a lot about industry and government working together. I think that's going to be critical. So that's why we're excited to collaborate with the Queensland Government through our MOU. We're also encouraged by the establishment, or soon to be establishment, of the Federal Government's Jet Zero Council, and we look forward to contributing to their work. However, we also believe that more collaboration will be needed to occur. So we've heard a bit about price remaining a significant challenge. We also think there will be a role for government to introduce policies to either incentivise or require the use of low carbon fuels like SAF and renewable diesel. Just around feedstocks. So we've heard a bit around feedstocks today, and I think they remain, or it remains, the biggest risk to this and other projects being supply security for low carbon intensity and sustainable feedstocks. Exporting our strategic supply of bioresources risks our own energy and manufacturing independence by offshoring manufacturing. So designing incentives for feedstocks to remain within Australia for onshore manufacturing should be a key focus for government. And in addition, innovation around feedstocks and extending supply chains for the commercialisation of the next wave of novel crops will be important as well. And just finally, around customer offtake or committed customers, any project needs to ensure a reliable market for its products. So we're particularly keen to identify domestic buyers to ensure we support the decarbonisation of the hard-to-abate sectors within Australia. We do recognise, however, that export opportunities will likely underpin scale. So we also believe we'll need to help bridge the gap between international pricing for SAF and renewable diesel and mineral jet and diesel. We believe working collaboratively with our customers will be key to help meet their decarbonisation requirements and secure ongoing supply. So just finally, in summary, we're really excited about this project and its potential. I think the combined capabilities of Ampol and ENEOS together with Lytton's advantaged manufacturing site makes this a really compelling project. And we really look forward to the state and federal governments developing supportive policy and solving some of the key issues which we've heard about today. Thanks very much.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ignacio Hernandez. I am the CEO of HIF Asia Pacific, which is the Asia Pacific arm of HIF Global. HIF Global is a company which is 100% focused on developing, constructing and operating e-fuel projects, or PTL projects, as the terminology is being used today. And I'll take you through some of the slides to introduce the company, the projects, and how we see the market for e-fuels, be them e-petrol, e-diesel, or e-SAF. Before I start, maybe I'll just point out the picture that you see here is our demo plant that was commissioned at the end of last year. It's the world's first and only e-fuel plant that's operating. It's in Patagonia, in the south of Chile, and it's producing e-methanol and e-petrol. In terms of HIF, we have very ambitious targets, and we are aiming to be producing around 9 billion litres of e-fuels by 2030. That is an amount that would require something around 25 gigawatts of electrolyzers. I'll go through how e-fuels are made in a second, but that's a lot of electrolyzers. We also need around 25 million tons of recycled CO2, so very large-scale vision, but we think that this can be delivered in the short term. We have a number of projects under development. The company started off developing projects in the south of Chile, in the region called Patagonia. It's probably the world's windiest place, and we have 20 gigawatts of wind farms under development that will be powering 6 2-gigawatt trains. Each of those trains would manufacture around 600 million litres of e-fuels. We took the company global. We opened up development teams in the US, in Australia. In the US, we're currently progressing a large-scale e-fuel plant that we expect to be starting construction in 12 months' time. That's a 2-gigawatt plant, about 600 to 700 million litres of e-gasoline, and we already announced plans for our second plant of a similar size to do e-SAF in the US. And in Australia, we've announced our first project, which is in Tasmania. It's a mid-sized plant, and we are working to develop a pipeline of projects as well. We very much see Australia as a production base. So when we came to Australia, it was based around the renewable energy potential. One of the key benefits of e-fuels is that we don't depend on feedstocks or bio-feedstocks. So the scalability of the technology is sort of the key aspect of it, and we saw Australia as a place where we could really leverage the vast size of the country, the wind energy and the solar energy in particular, and use that to export to markets that really value the decarbonisation component of the fuel. Unfortunately, as we all know, that's not quite the case here in Australia at the moment, although hopefully that will change over time. So we're very much focused on finding the best renewable energy resources, packaging them up in an easy-to-transport e-fuel, and sending it to the global demand centres and locations where CO2 abatement is valued. The company is controlled by a Chilean company called AME, a domestic power company in Chile. But we carried out a $260 million equity raising about a year ago, and we had some new partners joining, such as Porsche, Baker Hughes, and EIG. So what are e-fuels? Essentially, they're a synthetic version of a fossil fuel, so chemically they're exactly the same as petrol, diesel, aviation fuel, essentially made from green hydrogen and from recycled CO2. The characteristic is that because it's 100% the same, we can blend it up to 100%. You can blend it at any percentage you like. There's no difference chemically. Through the processes that we use, we can make the carbon neutrality the carbon intensity score be very high. We're talking about abatement levels of above 80 to 90%. The reason that we have chosen to focus on e-fuels, and we made the decision probably about 4 years ago, was essentially because we realized that actually e-fuels can be made today at large scale with existing technology. There's nothing that we need to wait for in terms of development of the technology. It's simply a matter of pulling the projects together. They are quite complicated, and bring all of the different pieces of technology into one plant and make it operate. And that's what we did in the demo plant. Essentially, we brought together existing technology, put it together, and developed IP around the integration of the plant. But other than that, this can be done right now, and that's what we're focused on doing. In terms of the actual process, this is just an example, but our demo plant in Chile, it's actually an off-grid plant, but it uses wind energy to power electrolyzers to create green hydrogen. We then have a source of CO2, whether it be direct air capture, whether it be a biogenic source, or industrial CO2 capture. We combine the CO2 and the green hydrogen in a methanol reactor to make methanol, e-methanol. That can be used directly in different applications, such as transport in the shipping sector, which is sort of something which I think is being adopted at the moment. Or you can convert it into another product like petrol, like jet fuel, by way of different conversion processes. All of these processes are essentially proven commercially at scale. In terms of the carbon intensity, one of the things that we always advocate for is that these low carbon fuels are assessed on a life cycle analysis basis. There tends to be a focus in some places, in Australia in particular, around emissions at the tailpipe. Our thinking is that you really have to assess the whole impact of the chain of production. And when we do that, we find that e-fuels can have a very significant carbon reduction through the fact that when we are making the product, we're actually sucking CO2 from the air, recycling CO2 that's already air, and then we have the emission happen when it's burned. So when you look at the whole life cycle of the product, we end up with a carbon reduction similar to what you would find in a battery electric car. So this slide here shows you the result of the processes that we're going through to have our fuel be certified and usable in the Californian low carbon fuel market, which is a market which for us is a very interesting one because it accepts, it's technology neutral, it assesses each solution independently and provides a carbon intensity score. So we're just going through this process now. Our initial findings, like I said, is that the fuel will deliver abatement of above 80%. This is the demo plant that that I introduced earlier. It's a fully integrated off-grid plant. It has one wind turbine which drives an electrolyzer. It has a CO2 source. In this case, it's industrial source. We will be adding a direct air capture unit this year as well. It's producing methanol, and then half of that methanol is being converted to gasoline. When we had the event, the launch event at the end of last year, our shareholder Porsche brought a few of their cars. we filled them up and drove them around with a synthetic fuel. So this is to show that this can actually be done right here, right now, and that's sort of the focus for us. Really what we want to do is have available another tool in the toolkit to decarbonize the transport sector. In terms of our plant in the US, I'd say that this plant is now our leading plant in terms of development, given the IRA and the subsidies available to green hydrogen production in the US and other subsidies available around renewable energy production. The economics of this plant are amazing. Essentially, when you take those into account, the plant will be able to produce an e-fuel at very close to parity with fossil fuels. But just some numbers on this. So this is a project, it's a 2 gigawatt electrolyzer size project, about $6 billion of capex, will produce around 700 million liters of e-gasoline in this case, and will recycle about 2 million tons of CO2. The project is in FEED already, and it's targeting to FID in the next 9 months or so. Very quickly, in Australia, we've announced our project in Tasmania. It's a smaller scale plant, around 100 million liters of e-petrol or e-SAF at this stage. We're trying to decide at the moment which route we want to take it. It's very much driven by commercials. 250 megawatts electrolyzer size plant. CO2 will come from capturing CO2 from burning combusting biomass in a boiler, which will also generate power for the plant. It's a plant that will essentially get its power by way of PPAs with new build renewable energy developments in Tasmania. We're aiming to FID this plant in the next 2 years and be operational in 2027. And in terms, I guess, just a couple of the latest news from our side. Just a couple of weeks ago, we announced our second plant in the US, which will be the same as our first plant, so roughly 650 million liters, 2 gigawatts electrolyzers. But this plant will be an eSAF plant, and we've already selected the technology providers, being Honeywell, UOP, and Johnson Matthey on the methanol side. We selected them based on a competitive process where we reviewed a whole number of technologies. The certification of the fuel under ASTM is ongoing. We expect that to be finalized by the end of this year. And we think that this plant will be roughly about 90% reduction in CO2 emissions. And then finally, in terms of regulation, like I said, our focus has been on export markets and markets that value the decarbonization component of the fuels. Essentially, that's been the European Union, the US, and we are seeing some progress on the Japanese side as well in terms of introduction of support for these fuels. But I wanted to point out that under the European regulation, the RED III, which is being worked through at the moment, but there's already some agreements in place. There's actually a eSAF specific sub-target that's been announced, and they're talking about 1.2 to 2% eSAF specific within a broader, I think, 6% target for SAF. And then secondly, we're seeing a whole bunch of progress around the introduction of SAF in the US, obviously very large scale. I think the US for us now is a very different market because of the subsidies, the production subsidies that we have. We actually don't really need a mandate, so we could sell our fuel into the Californian LCFS market or other markets and still be, have a market for the fuel. Thank you.
Thank you to all our speakers. And great to have you all on stage. We now have, I think, about 40 minutes for questions and answers. So what I'm going to do is I think we have people with mics in the room. If you'd like to put up your hand, please identify who you are, and then if you could direct your question to a particular panelist or whether it's for the whole panel. So we have one question up front here, and then the second one down here. So over to you, sir.
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentations. Andrea Lopez from Wally. My question is to Adriana from Licella. When you started, or Licella started the journey, the landscape of refining in Australia was quite different in terms of number of refineries. For your technology to upgrade from the biocrude to a fuel, what capacity are you considering feasible from an economic point of view?
Yes, thanks for the question. So refining capacity in Australia has been greatly reduced over the last period of times, and the existing refineries are being heavily supported, and we hope that that continues while they can transition using programs like we heard about. So for our biocrude, there's an opportunity to co-process the material in existing refineries. And so we've got a number of development programs that are looking at that, different pathways through refineries that we can upgrade a blend of our biocrude products. But ultimately, and especially if we're going to strive towards net zero targets, we want to move beyond co-processing into standalone upgraders. Through our Aviation joint venture, which is constructing our first biomass project in Prince George, we have an alliance with Shell. We're working with Shell to develop a standalone upgrader for our biocrude and to optimise that to SAF and high-value product outcomes. But to justify that, we will need multiple projects, and so hence the hub and spoke model that I presented there. So we will look at, once we get the production scales up, to move beyond co-processing into that hub and spoke model. If we can't co-process locally, there is, like was described, there's an opportunity to export this product. You know, the export markets are quite strong, and there's a very strong market pull for this into co-processing in other jurisdictions as well.
Thanks, Adriana. We had a question over here.
Hi, my name is Tats Kato. I'm a head of the project origination at Sojitz. So I have a question to Max and Ignacio. So last two weeks, there have been some movement for like hydrogen, and also, for example, in the federal budget, which is in 9th of May, announced a $2 billion funding for hydrogen head start program. And also on the weekend, in a G7 summit, which took place in Japan, the Biden and the US, Joe Biden and Albanese mentioned that Australian hydrogen producer could benefit for American IRA Act. So what's your view for these two policy movements help like e-fuel SAF production in Australia? I would like to hear your view. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I think it was $2 billion announced for Australian hydrogen, which is always going to be quite difficult to compete with the IRA, which I think has about $400 billion for renewable fuels and hydrogen. So I think it's an important part of the puzzle. There is still a large cost gap between the cost of hydrogen production that we currently have in Australia and the amount of capacity that's currently online. And so there's still a lot of work to do, and I think that money will go a long way in increasing scale here. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's going to be very difficult to compete with the US and their regulations there. Ignacio?
I think just to add to what you were saying, the other, I guess, bit of news that happened last week was that the Japanese government made an announcement around the fact that they're thinking about bringing forward the introduction of e-fuels into Japan. So in the strategy that they announced to the government, the transport sector about 12 months ago, they had e-fuels in the 2040s. They've now updated that. I think we were part of that. We took them to our plant, and I think that it was quite helpful for them to see that this is actually happening right now and can be delivered in the short term. So they announced that they're now moving e-fuels, the introduction of e-fuels in Japan to 2030, which essentially means now, because if you want to deliver fuel by 2030, you have to really start building stuff in the next couple of years. So I think overall support is increasing. The momentum is really building up. In terms of the Australian support, I think it's very helpful. It's a start. From our perspective, obviously we have projects in the US that benefit from the IRA, but I get the feeling though that demand and the market will be so large that it can't all be supplied and subsidized by the American taxpayer. So I think there'll be a place for perhaps unsubsidized projects or projects that don't have that level of support, just given the demand that we see for these products. But yeah, absolutely, the $2 billion announced will help, especially if you think about support that you're getting on the offtake side, from the Japanese side or the Korean side. They also want to see that Australia is actually supporting this project. So they don't want to be the only ones funding the gap in the price. So I think it's quite helpful. It's a start. But where really I think that there's probably longer term benefits is thinking about introducing low carbon fuel standards in Australia itself. Whether that gets done on the aviation side or the transport side, I think in terms of getting these industries up and running and getting the cost reductions to happen, from my perspective, a mandate of some sort together with subsidies and that combination it's what we need to get this ball rolling down the hill and getting those costs down.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? There's a question up front here.
Hi. Yes. Hello, Jet Chong from the Federal Government Clean Energy Regulator. I had a question for those involved with, procuring biogenic feedstocks, and whether you could comment on, social license or anything that you've learned from sourcing biogenic feedstocks, particularly from the agricultural sector, and how you've engaged with stakeholders there.
So our project in Tasmania and also our first project in Chile is looking to source the CO2 from waste biomass combustion. It's not, from our perspective, the medium to longer term future of e-fuels is driven by direct air capture and using that technology to extract CO2 from the air and recycle it that way. But we see, whilst that technology is not quite up there yet and it needs to be worked on and cost reduced, we see the waste biomass as a potential sort of bridging and transition solution for our very first projects. And so we have included those components as part of these first projects in Tassie. I think there's a history of people looking to develop biomass-based energy in Tasmania, and there's been some opposition to that. What we are finding is that as long as we're focusing on plantations and waste from plantation, that seems to be something which is much more acceptable. And I think once also we continue to work with the communities, sort of explaining what we're doing and why we're doing it, and the fact that we are truly recycling CO2 through short duration harvesting that happens at the plantations and using the waste associated with that, a product which in Tasmania is truly not used. I think we're going to gain further support, but so far our experience has been quite positive in that front. I think when you start thinking about native forestry, it begins to be a bigger issue.
Okay.
Can I just add something to that? So Licella has looked at forestry residues, and we have it's a sad state of affairs when the Australian native forest sector is world leading and world class in their sustainability credentials, yet the residues that would make that industry more efficient are taken off the table from this industry. And so that's something as a sector that we should grapple with and lean into, because it's an opportunity that we're then looking at overseas projects going forward on far less sustainable forestry residues than our native residues in Australia. So please come and talk to me about it. It's one of my hobby horse topics. But we are seeing that this is an absolutely an industry that the agricultural sector wants to lean into and wants to be a part of. And the agricultural sector is sick of being at the whims of commodity overseas markets, such as sugar, that are very volatile and insecure. They are very keen to look at long-term stable contracts with stable offtake agreements. We have an excellent, very advanced agricultural industry that has shown that we can increase and exceed production efficiencies on a global standard. So we have an agricultural sector that's very well accounted for environmentally. There's processes in place to already report sustainability and other credentials. So the Australian agricultural sector is very well placed to, fit into reporting schemes that we need for carbon intensity calculations for fuels, for example. So I think we're very lucky to have a very advanced agricultural centre industry. They're very well supported by CSIRO. We've got the Sugar Research Council here, for example, coming up with very good pathways for us to increase biomass and the sustainability of biomass. So we're very lucky to be working in this jurisdiction.
I might just add a quick comment on that. I think from a ultimate customer perspective, and I'm talking about our corporate clients and passengers here, there is very much a qualitative sort of social license and sustainability credential overlay to it all. And I think in the early stage of this market development, it's really important that we're going to have to tell the story. The challenge is, of course, as everyone in this room knows, there's lots of weird and wonderful ways you can make SAF, and it comes from a variety of feedstocks, each having their own sort of story. But to Adriana's point, I don't think we've got the luxury, given the challenge we've got of just saying this is in, this is out. I think we have to own the story, own the communication, and own the narrative, which is really what underpins our investment work. We want to know that as the airline. So I think there's a good story to tell. We've just got to make sure we've got the right language and narrative for it.
Thank you, Graeme and Adriana. Over to you.
There's a question for Graeme. Last week, regulators in the UK announced they're looking to ban the advertising that claims carbon neutrality based on purchasing third-party offsets, and EU's looking to do similar things as well. Qantas and their collaboration with Tasman Environmental has delivered a lot of benefits to the business over the past decade and served an important purpose in the absence of alternative solutions. Given that sentiment around offsets is changing, when can we expect to see Qantas offering passengers the option to purchase a portion of SAF when they buy their flight ticket?
Yeah, watch this space. It's going to be pretty soon. The challenge that we've got is how do we sit it alongside our existing offset program, which is a carbon neutral offering at the moment, so to make your flight completely carbon neutral through offsets. Because of the relative price differential of SAF to offsets, if we were to try to do the same with SAF, I think that impost would be too great in the early stages of our customer proposition. So we're just fine-tuning that, and if you look around what other airlines are doing, they're either directing it to incremental SAF purchases, or in the case of United, they're more directing those contributions towards industry development. So less about buying incremental fuel and more just about general supporting new tech, new feedstock development. So we're doing a lot of market research now, just seeing what resonates with our customers. The encouraging bit, the test audience, their awareness of SAF is close to zero. So we've all got a big challenge to lift that. But the encouraging bit is once it is explained to them, there is a 20-point sort of lift in willingness to contribute over and above offsets, which I think just reflects the fact it's a direct emissions reduction. So I think we're encouraged by that and watch this space.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
Sorry, can you hear that?
Yes.
Yeah, so Jeff Bell from Microbiogen. Question's really for Ignacio, but possibly for everyone on the panel. I did notice on your presentation you're talking about your plant being $6 billion for 700 million litres. That seems fairly capital heavy per litre of production. I'm just wondering what's happening to the appetite for funding these in an increasing capital cost environment, interest rates are going up, and I guess for everyone, where do you see the greatest potential? Is it in reducing your operating costs, or is it reducing the capital to get these things up and running?
Sorry, I think I heard half the question, but I think I got the gist a little bit. I mean, I think when you think about our e-fuels, the reason that we think of them as scalable is because we don't have ongoing feedstock requirements, right? So our projects are essentially all upfront capex and essentially zero OPEX. So once you build the chemical plant and the renewable energy farm is providing the energy, then that's it. So your operating costs are essentially your financing cost. So from that perspective, when you think about where the costs are going, how you're going to get the cost down, is essentially reducing capex. And if you look at what the capex components are that are contributing the most to the cost, it's essentially today the electrolyzers and the renewable energy part. So we see that electrolyzers are pretty much where solar panels were 15 years ago. Despite the fact that they've been around for 100 years, they haven't really been done at scale, and so the learnings and cost downs haven't happened yet. So we're very much at the start of that process. So we see significant cost downs there, and we also expect again continued reductions in cost of solar power, wind farms, etc. We're probably not seeing it right now, but we hope that the trend will resume. So that's, I guess, the big difference with us. It's the upfront capex that needs to be amortized. But when you look at it from the perspective of a levelized cost, that's sort of the one way to look at it. It's still pretty much a product that today would cost, unsubsidized, would be 3 times the price of fossil. It's probably more than what biofuel production costs. I'm not a biofuel person, I've got no idea what it costs, but I guess it's more expensive. But when I look at the biofuel pricing, it's kind of aligned with that. So that was one of the reasons that when we started to think about what to do in terms of the energy that we had, we chose e-fuels because we could see these markets in Europe in particular where biofuels or low carbon fuels, and the only low carbon fuel available was biofuels at the time. The pricing was up there. It was 3 or 4 times the price of fossil in terms of the energy component. So if you have these markets that value the CO2 reduction, then the economics can be made to work.
Would anybody else like to add? Next.
I could probably speak to the more the biogenic side of things. So we have a similar conclusion to Ignacio when it comes to the power to liquids, that it's the capital and the cost of hydrogen that are the key cost drivers that need to be reduced. On the biogenic side, the main cost drivers are the feedstock inputs. So the cost of the vegetable oil, the cost of the ethanol are really the key cost drivers, and there are limited methods to get those costs down in a step change manner. So things like vegetable oil, we don't see really coming down over time, which does somewhat put a bit of a ceiling on how far we can get those costs down. And something like ethanol, which is quite reliant on first G feedstocks at the moment, we do see the potential for second generation ethanol and the advanced fermentation of lignocellulosic material, enabling the cost reduction ethanol, which could bring ATJ down a lot further. But yeah, quite limited by the feedstock prices there.
Anyone else? Mike?
Look, I'll just make a comment on, first of all, you need to choose the right location. So I think not only from proximity to feedstocks, you want to minimise the amount of transport involved from a carbon perspective and also from a cost perspective. And then you want to be as close as possible to where your customers are to minimise, again, moving your product around. I think, from Ampol's perspective, if you can integrate with an existing operation, you talked about cost of hydrogen. If you've got hydrogen generation and excess hydrogen, that certainly brings your cost down as well, and all the infrastructure involved. And then I guess the other point that is worth making is around partnerships. So if you can both bring a partner on to spread the risk and share the capex heavy load of a big project, that certainly helps as well.
Thank you.
Can I just add, I think we need to remember it is a very young industry still. Even in EU and US, it's been going for 10, 15 years maybe. So we still need the technologies to mature, and as they do, industry will innovate and be able to bring the price down of production, price down of equipment, and the right feedstocks and right technologies will come to the surface. But in the meantime, we do need federal and state governments to lean in. If you remember 2016 in the solar boom here in Australia, ARENA really lent in, the federal government supported, and now we've got solar at parity to general electricity. So we need the same efforts with biofuels.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said by the panel. I think one thing we have to be mindful of is that a lot of these projects around biofuels are really about scale. If you look at our recent expansion, the Singapore expansion, where we've doubled the capacity of our refinery from 1.3 million tonnes per annum to 2.6 million tonnes per annum, the investment in that project is 2.5 billion Australian dollars. So there's going to be capex at scale at the initial stages. But as you said, as these projects continue to develop and grow in other markets as well, you could see these costs actually coming down in the future. Any other questions? One over here.
Sorry, it's me again. Question for Max. Well, congratulations on the report you prepared, and thanks for sharing those insights today. I think you said there's potential for 60% of Australian SAF could be serviced by biomass sector. A couple of weeks ago, another report was released by Griffith University in the Race for 2030 CRC that found that if you round up all the ag residues and organic waste, you could replace about 50% of the biogas in Australia. So 50% biogas, 60% SAF, but they're all competing for the same material, so the race for biomass is on. My question is, what needs to happen, perhaps at a federal policy level, to ensure that those feedstocks go to their best and highest use when it comes to prioritising the difficult to decarbonise industries like aviation and mineral processing and so forth, where electrification probably isn't a solution in a net zero future? And is there any potential for you see for incentivising energy crop production in sort of greenfield areas, maybe in sort of some of the dry parts of Australia where you've got drought or crops that do well in low water areas that could boost those volumes so that we can indeed address both the SAF and the biogas needs?
Thanks for that. Easy one. As an employee of a government agency, I'm very hesitant to comment on current policy or recommend future policy going forward. So I'll start with that caveat. But the consideration of SAF within the broader SAF, but the broader energy transition is a very important piece of this puzzle. There's going to be a lot of competition for these feedstocks. There's a lot of different industries that are vying to get to net zero, and some serious national thinking about how we divvy up the, spoils of what we have in Australia to ensure that collectively we are working towards net zero is, I'm going to think, be a key piece of government thinking going ahead. So I think looking at these industries in isolation is perhaps not the most beneficial way of moving forward, and there's going to have to be some more high-level thinking about how we allocate these resources to the industries that require them and ensure that everyone is accessing the lowest cost way to decarbonise that's appropriate for their industry.
Can I add to that? So for the projects that we're looking at, we find that our technology fits in as part of the solution, but rarely alone. We need to have renewable electricity. We use electricity. It impacts the carbon intensity of our products. So we need to do that. We have a renewable CO2 output from our plant. So we'd love to put one of their plants on the back of our plants instead of using incinerators, so we can get liquid fuels from our process and use our CO2 in their process. But doing that stacks technology risk. So in this infant stage of the industry, we're a little bit reluctant to do that, but that's where we'll end up. The project that I announced today with Mossman, one of our partners for that is Helmont. We are looking at putting our facility integrated with an AD plant for biogas production and integrating with the sugar mill as well, so that we can look at the whole resource and figure out where the highest value output. So it truly is then a biorefinery concept, not just a one technology for one solution. So by doing that, we can integrate and get the highest value and get the best energy balance for the system, and then end up with the highest value products at the back end. So the industry will start figuring that out, but we need to mature so that we're not stacking technology risk on technology risk.
Thank you. I'm just going to take the liberty of asking a question here from the panel, and perhaps Michael, I'll start with you, because we've spent a lot of time in the discussions in the morning, and the focus has very much been on sustainable aviation fuels. But we are looking here at the role Australia can play in the global fuels transition. So I wouldn't say we've forgotten, but I think what tends to happen in a lot of these discussions is that when it comes to road transport, everyone focuses on electric vehicles for cars. And then you've got sustainable aviation fuel for the hard to abate sector of aviation. But what about heavy transport? What about public transport? What's the role that biofuels can play here in Australia in decarbonizing heavy transport? Because I know you have a significant fleet of trucks and public transport that needs to be decarbonized as well. And if you don't decarbonize those fleets, just having electric vehicles for some of your light vehicles is not going to be a solution. So what do you see as a role for biofuels for road transport?
Yes, look, I think there is a significant role for biofuels to play with heavy transport, road transport in particular. But I'd say the industry is not really considering it heavily at the moment. So I was at the Brisbane Truck Show. Some of you might have been here last week. There was talks about hydrogen vehicles, electric vehicles. There was one, I think it was Volvo, who actually had some, might have been in Neste, renewable diesel. But I would say, there's been surveys out to the road transport industry, and very few of the operators, particularly the small to medium size, are even thinking about decarbonisation. So it's quite a long way to go in education and incentivisation or mandates or some policy in order to bring some action. I think in terms of a drop-in fuel and not having to replace all that infrastructure, both the fuels infrastructure and also the vehicles themselves, this is an easy solution to start decarbonising right now.
And Max, what can an organisation like CSIRO do to support what Michael said? I mean, clearly education and awareness is necessary. Renewable diesels are a drop-in solution. They are available right now. But clearly, there's a lack of awareness, very much like Graeme mentioned about sustainable aviation fuel. So what role can your organisation play?
Yeah, sustainable aviation fuel and other biofuels is one of those sectors that really cuts across basically all facets of our organisation. It's very much like at the moment we're trying to find which government department is best placed to help us with SAF. Well, we've got the agricultural side of things, which CSIRO has quite a large presence in. And then there's the actual upgrading of those fuels, be it through gasifiers or similar technologies. And then that final transitioning of those intermediates into fuels. Then there's considering what are the environmental implications of these different supply chains. Another area that CSIRO is quite strong in developing frameworks for this and then monitoring these processes, as well as our Oceans and Atmospheres group, which is looking at potentially analysing what are the effects of some of these emissions in our atmosphere. So really all the way from the well to the wake, we have a variety of different expertise and scientists willing to help and analyse these issues and problems.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? There's one question from the audience here and one here.
Hi, Chloe Gibson from Green Sustainability. In this sector, it's really easy to get that carbon transition and not consider the other social and environmental factors. Given the aviation industry is dependent on staff, both in the short term, like aircraft, and in the long term, as rates really true for the air. And thus dependent on land being freed up for the SAF production, considering waste and residue are needed at 100% of the road. Do you see the aviation industry and the industry having to play a role in lobbying for policies that free up this budget by reducing potential heat consumption and ensuring that we can also secure the feedstocks for SAF, but at the same time ensuring that the SAF feedstocks aren't contributing to further deforestation, further degradation of biodiversity, and also food insecurity.
Is that on? I'll try to take that question on. So, yeah, I think as I alluded to, I think as an airline at the end of this value chain, we are very focused on the qualitative sustainability factors which you mentioned, over and above just the pure emission reduction. I think, I feel like we've got collectively this brand SAF that we're all going to have to protect going forward. And there are sustainability considerations on all pathways and all feedstocks. So we need to be conscious of that moving forward. We're very conscious of the food versus fuel debate. I think it's more pronounced for obvious reasons in Europe than it necessarily is in Australia, but it's still a live issue. I think in all of the projects we've seen, and we've been all around the country, the projects that we think are the highest integrity from a SAF perspective are the ones that try to, through their feedstock strategy, fix up a environmental problem. So, we're looking at a project in WA at the moment where we're trying to reforest parts of the wheat belt, which has been subject to 100 years of broadacre cereal farming, which is not particularly great for that soil type over in WA. And the project design is these belt plantings and planting on marginal land to try to put back some carbon back into the soil. And specifically the mallee tree is chosen because it is native to that species, that area. It can be coppiced, and so it's renewable as a source of biomass. And so that project design is around trying to do things in a clever way so that it's an ACCU generating project. It's biomass for SAF. And, I think biodiversity is going to be coming around the corner at us pretty quickly as well. And so there's room in that project for biodiversity plantings. But that is, I just raise that as an example of how the best-in-class projects are being designed so that they can accommodate those sort of concerns.
Thanks, Graeme. So we had a question here, and then the last question I'll give Shahana. So up front here.
Hello, my name's Richard Gorman from Calfresh Bioenergy. My question's for you, Max. We're predominantly a farming company moving into bioenergy. CRISPR technology is on our radar for improving all of the plants, food or otherwise. Does CSIRO see a day when CRISPR technology for breeding of plants can be acceptable in Australia?
I can't talk to CRISPR specifically, but I know that our plant oil team are certainly looking at a variety of genetic modification techniques in order to increase the yield of our oil seeds and even start to select for the exact hydrocarbon length that would make for a more, I guess, economic transition into fuels. So currently, you might have to crack those hydrocarbons again and remake them into the jet fuel strain, but there is the potential to almost grow these ready to be translated into jet fuels. And so we're very much looking at both oil seeds and leaf oils and different techniques to, I guess, play with their genetic makeup to enhance yield and to reduce environmental impacts on land.
So we also run a few trucks to cart everything around. So we've actually been focusing just on diesel replacement, dollar for dollar, because what we can see, the takeout from what we've been looking at in Europe and America is that actually saves us money and emissions. So is it all the focus on SAF, or have you actually been looking at the heavy vehicle and public transport? Because I guess that's where we're focusing, just to have an immediate fuel replacement option.
Yeah, so with these plans that we looked at, although the focus of the report was SAF, you're always going to get other cuts. So you're going to be getting renewable diesel, and you're going to get lighter hydrocarbons like LPG. You'll also be getting naphtha, depending on the pathway and depending how you configure that plant. So you can change operating conditions or capital conditions to select for what fuels that you want. And so in a lot of these pathways, such as vegetable oil or converting municipal solid waste, you are going to be getting these road transport fuels. So we definitely see it as a pretty holistic approach. There are some pathways that do select more so for 100% SAF, but it is very horses for courses. So we're certainly conscious of the road transport sector and all of its other options as well. So we're also looking at electrification for road transport as well as hydrogen for mining, for long-haul trucks, but we all see them in the mix for sure.
Thank you. And Shahana, over to you.
You would think I would know how to do that, wouldn't you? Just going back to the question earlier, very happy to talk to you later independently in regards to sort of the industry position around the development of SAF. I think that sort of following on from Graeme's comment, as an industry body, we absolutely are not advocating for the removal of agriculture in order to supply sustainable aviation fuel. I think it's really essential, and looking at the sustainability credentials that would be applied to any emissions reduction from any renewable fuels, land use change is such a significant contributing factor. So, yeah, we do not see that is the pathway for the development of the industry in Australia. Coming back to the panel and coming back to the original kind of proposition, it's a bit of a challenging one, but we've got a good mix here. How real do you think the threat is of Australia replicating the LNG environment in relation to Australian feedstock, Australian potential renewable fuels, going off to service many other jurisdictions, but missing the mark here?
I'll go first. Look, I think it is a real risk, and I think, if there were one policy, there's multiple policy asks that I'm sure we all would like, but I think designing incentives in order to ensure that our strategic supply of biofeedstocks stay here in Australia and are processed here in Australia, I think that'd be my ask.
Just to add to that, I think we're already seeing it. We've got a lot of our tallow used cooking oil going offshore. We've got a lot of very heavy emitters from Asian countries coming into Australia looking for feedstocks to export. So we're being seen as a, same as coal, LNG, as a feedstock producer. We send it offshore and it comes back in and we buy the fuel back in. So we've got to look at that rounded policy, the over umbrella policy that was talked about in this morning's session for providing a technology neutral, feedstock neutral ability for industry to come forward. There may be other industries like SAF that need a few extra tax breaks along there. But I think it's really important that we do develop that policy that keeps or promotes local industry, but also promotes local uplift of fuel.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of this session, and I'd just like to go a quick round with all of the panelists and ask you, in terms of the topic at hand, which is the role that Australia can play in the global fuel transition, what would be the one thing that's needed to really drive this transition? And to your point, Michael and Matt, around feedstock, I think if you want to keep the feedstock in the country, you've got to have a domestic industry. And you need to have a domestic industry, you have to have enabling policies. Currently, that doesn't exist in Australia. So, for your feedstock producers, they have a ready market right now. So you need to create that ready market, but to create that ready market, like I said, you need enabling policies. So just going around with the panel, what's the one thing needed to, raise Australia's sort of position in this global fuels transition? I'll start with you, Max.
I think that one of those will be putting a real value on liquid fuel security. Our massive reliance on imported liquid fuels, I think, has been pointed out for decades, and I think that risk is only getting higher with recent geopolitical events. I think, and with COVID, I think it's becoming clearer and clearer how important sovereignty is and sovereign fuel production will be. So I think being able to add that value into what it costs to make these fuels, I think will help to encourage local production and see that this isn't as expensive as it seems once you consider all the risks. Thank you.
I'm not sure I could narrow it down to one, so I'm going to go with two. But I think if we're going to do this at scale and at pace, I think collective action in the value chain is essential, and that orchestration is going to be key, so that the sector is not working at cross purposes, all underpinned by this the policy underpinnings. If there is inertia there, we're going to lose our moment in the sun. So there's a real sense of urgency there.
There are some challenges as a new technology provider looking at deploying projects. There is a real and perceived challenge of getting approvals, consents, industrial zoned areas in regional communities. So these feedstocks are regional. We want to see regional development, but actually having access to correctly zoned and licensable sites can sometimes be a multi-year task in getting areas rezoned. So from a local government, state government, federal government level, to actually be putting some thought and direction into paving the way for these projects to be able to get planning and approval and to get better at being able to deliver new technologies. So it's very hard to put in an application that asks for all of the emissions data of an existing commercial plant when none of them exist. And if that's your barrier to actually getting an approval to build the first plant, then we're at a standing start, not going anywhere. So being able to streamline and get government support and a willingness for innovation and new technologies to come into the economy, we need to streamline and enable that process.
Outside of liquid fuels policy, I think communication of the benefit, the carbon benefit that decarbonising liquid fuels can bring to the broad goals of Australia is really key. No one really knows about SAF or renewable diesel, so we really need to communicate that out there, get the social licence from the voters, then we'll get the support from the politicians. So that's key for me.
Thanks. Look, I'll just reiterate around feedstocks. I think in order to safeguard our energy security and independence, we need to design incentives or policies in order to ensure feedstocks remain here.
I would say just focus on what is your competitive advantage. So when we chose to come to Australia, we saw it as a globally competitive place from the perspective of the land mass and the ability to do these e-fuel plants at very, very large scale in the middle of nowhere, where we're not competing for the use of that resource. And so, that to me is the key thing. You know, this is a global world. We're competing around the world. I don't know how competitive biofuel in this country will be or is. We think it'll be very competitive in renewable energy production. And so, focus on what the key competitive advantages are.
Well, thank you. And thank you, a big thank you to all the panelists as well. I mean, Australia is going to fall short, I said in my initial comments, of its 2030 emissions reduction target by 14 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. That's 7 years away. But I think listening to the panel today, there's a lot of hope. But we need to expedite things. We need to speed things up. You need, as I said, to have enabling policies. But I think there's an opportunity here for Australia to play a significant role in the global fuels transition. And it's up to organizations like yourselves to really drive this in Australia.